channel Space Moose. In today's episode, the time has come for the space set from year 1985. In total there was 12 basic sets released that year, plus let's call it additional set, one additional set. 12 sets, that's more than in the starting year 1979 when there was 11 sets, but in 1985, despite the large sets number, there was not a single moon base, and there was no large spaceship which would act as flagship. But we had one 2 years earlier in 1983, so that was not a big problem. A lot of new parts became available in 1985, and I'll show them on this fine example. It's a robot. It was the first year when robots appeared in classic space. This robot is almost entirely built of new parts. Foot of the robot is made of 2 stud diameter dish. Radar dishes were available from the very beginning. We had 8 stud and 4 stud dishes. In 1982 we got a webbed dish 6 stud in diameter. In 1985 we got a 2 stud dish. Body of the robot is also a new part. It's a brick with studs, 2 studs in 3 directions. The back of the robot is 2 studs can get into the back of the robot. Very universal part. Arms. Robot's arms are made of new parts as well. They were almost exclusively used as robot arms. And if I recall, there was probably only one example when robots used different parts for arms. Head. Robot's head is also a new part. It's a 1 stud brick, but it has studs in all directions. Antennas. They are new parts as well. They could be used as an antenna, as robots' ears. They were also widely used as controls for spaceships, and they started to replace the traditional steering wheel. The only part that is not new in this robot is the eye. Another very important new part was flexible hose. It was around 8 stud long and had fittings on both ends. They could be bent in almost all positions, but when they knew they were so stiff that sometimes it was hard to keep them in this position and they were falling off. Another new part in 1985 was this part on top of the spaceship. It's a cross between a cone and a vertical fin. Here they appeared as one part. Additionally, there were 1 stud on each side, 1 stud on the front, and in the back you could fit rocket engine. Very useful part, but not very versatile. There was actually only one use for this piece. And another new part, I'll show it as a separate example. This part appeared in 1985. It's a plate 8 stud by 2 studs, but the middle, the 3 stud section is 1 brick deep. It was fairly useful for constructing various cockpits of spaceships. But it caused some problems, which I will show you in a moment. So now we can get into detailed presentation of the sets, and again we'll start with the smallest one. And that was the set 6805. Like most of the smallest sets in 1985, it was actually built around the Space Seat, which arrived a year earlier. We had 2 wings and an engine fitted in the back of the seat, 3 more wings, 2 on the sides and 1 in the front, 2 small cannons, plus 1 movable cannon in the front. Steering was by the new controls, the levers. And Blue Astronaut as pilot. On those wings, if you remember the sets from 1984, you could attach rockets here if you had spare rockets. Next set, 6806. Again, space seat with various pieces around it. But what is interesting about this set? It has, I think it's less than 20 pieces in it, and 6 of those pieces are the rocket engines. On top of that, you have the flexible hoses that I mentioned before, levers as controls, and the astronaut has a kind of tool which looks like adjustable spanner with a radar fitted on it. Then the next set, 6807. Again, it's space seat with various attachments on it. You have 2 engines on the sides, controllable by the levers. 2 engines in the bottom, 1 in the back. So for the flying craft of this size, 5 engines. That's perhaps a bit too much. 2 radars in the front, and another feature of this set was this small robot. The smallest one that they made in LEGO Space. Then we had slightly bigger sets, like 6825. You see powerful laser in the nose, rotating cannon just before the pilot. Craft was controlled again by the new levers. It was equipped with flexible hose, 2 of them. Robot body, the new part was used at the bottom to hold these lights. In the back you have 1 main engine and 4 smaller ones, which made it look, from the back it looked kind of like an X-wing. And two radars on these small wings. Very handy flying craft. Then we had the first rover this year. Was 6826, if I remember correctly. And like most of the rovers of that era, it was on the balloon tires. You have the space wing in the front with radar, another radar on the stick, vertically positioned, 2 thrusters in the back, and the most interesting thing about that rover is that the chassis is made of the new plate with the recessed center, which enables to fit the, you can call it ejector seat. So in case if the rover gets stuck in the crater or something like that, the operator can return safely to the base using this ejector seat. Next rover is slightly bigger and much more specialized. It's 6847 Space Dozer. And as the name says, it was a dozer with the movable blade in the front. You also have rotating laser for breaking the rocks probably, and then you could collect the samples into the blade. The operator has 2 computers and 2 levers to control the vehicle. You have the elastic hoses, and you have the vertically placed space wing, but nothing attached to it. So if you had some spare parts, you could attach an extra laser or antenna or rocket or whatever came to your mind. The driver has very basic tools like shovel on this side and pickaxe on the other side, but for collecting minerals these tools could be very, very useful, and most of all they were very reliable. The only problem for me with this rover is that when you look from the top on it, you can see that the width of the vehicle is much bigger than the length of it, of the chassis. I think it would look a lot better if instead of the 6 stud Technic bricks, if you use 8 stud brick, then you can fit 3 wheels on each side, and the silhouette of the rover is more balanced then. But it's just my opinion. Next on the list is set 6848. And what is weird, a set with the same number appeared 3 years later in the Futuron series. And to confuse matters even more, the later set is listed on Bricklink as 6848/1, and this earlier one is 6848/2 for some reason. Another weird thing about this set is that in the original instructions, the astronaut's hands were yellow, which made him look like he forgot his gloves, which wouldn't be good for his health in space. But the structure of the craft is very nice, but I have to admit mine is not exactly following the instructions. Originally, this piece should be computer with 15 buttons, but I admit I ran out of those pieces in light gray, so I replaced it with the one with grill. And what is more, what was the point of having the computers here in the front where the pilot couldn't reach the buttons? In the back of the vehicle you have 2 boxes for equipment or for mineral samples, and tool rack in the back where you have metal detector and a hammer. Obviously, hammer was very useful in space. Possibly you can fix a spacecraft with a hammer. Then we have set 6872. And if I recall correctly, it's the smallest space flying craft which was equipped with this type of canopy. One of the interesting things about this set is that it was one of only 2 sets to have those antennas in trans neon color. The other set was this one here. We get into it later. Part of this set was an extra crew member in the shape of this small robot. But there was also one problem. There is a cargo compartment in the back of this ship. You can open it and have a look inside. But it's too small to let the robot travel in it. So robot was part of the set, but there was no space for him in the spacecraft. And the cockpit was constructed using the new piece, the recessed 8x2 plate. And as you can see, that's the problem that I mentioned before. The cockpit was open to elements. In this craft, it was not a big problem because you had movable flaps on the side that you could lower down and make it more or less hermetic. But there was no such a possibility in the other spacecraft. Here you have the flexible hoses, the new cone engine part, and it's very balanced and handy spacecraft. Next set is quite unique because it's the first walker in classic space. It was a machine to move on the surface of the planet, and it had movable legs. This type of mechanism was used in the later walkers as well, and I'll show them in later episodes. Another interesting thing with this set was that it was one of, I think, only 2 sets where you had this canopy mounted vertically. Additionally, you had another non-transparent one in the back, which made the cockpit shape unique to this set. On the sides you have containers for equipment, you have the flexible hoses. In the back of the vehicle you have a seat for a passenger. There was no passenger included in the set, but you had some space provided for him if needed. In the front we have the movable arm with a gripper, known from very early sets. Very unique design. Then we're getting to set 6891, which is this spacecraft. Very cool looking. It gives the impression of speed. I probably didn't mention this panel. It's a new part as well in 1985. If you look from the top on it, the slope matches the roof windows from Lego Town sets. This is the corner panel. For the straight panel we had to wait 1 more year. It appeared in 1986 and we'll show it in the next episode. The color scheme is very cool. Gray with some black elements and trans green canopy. The front section of the spacecraft can be detached as an independent fighter. And there's the problem that I mentioned before. The cockpit is not airtight. You can see the astronaut in it. He's partially shielded by these engines on the sides, but the cockpit is not hermetic. It wasn't a big problem back then for me as a kid, but what is weird, even in 1985 you had enough pieces available to make it airtight. Actually, I don't know why it hasn't been done. The rear section of the spaceship contains a cargo module, but again, like in the previous set, the cargo space is not big enough to fit the robot in. How was he supposed to travel in this spacecraft? Cool design was the wings fitted on hinges. They were sloping gently downwards, which for me back then it was almost the shape of the Star Destroyer from Empire Strikes Back. But of course Lego couldn't copy it directly back then, because of the copyright. Next spaceship is quite similar in the design, but it's bigger. This is set 6931. The nose is very complicated with the two big lasers, two radars. Here you have the two new pieces as engine blocks. Again, the spaceship can be separated for the forward section. And as you can see, there was plenty of printed parts back then, especially with arrows. Some external computers, more arrows on the bricks. And here you can see the same problem again. Cockpit is not airtight. Again, you have those engines used as a partial shelter for the sides of the cockpit, but it should have been built up to make it airtight. There was enough parts available back then to do it. Trans blue canopy, yellow astronaut as the pilot. The most interesting thing was in the cargo compartment. I know that by today's standards it looks very square and boxy, but back then it was not a problem, especially that the downward sloping wings compensated for this effect. Here you have another printed part. It's a kind of telephone. You have the flexible hoses attached to the wings. And if you take off those two pieces, cargo compartment can be open, and we have a small six-wheeled rover and the robot as a driver. And that's the improvement over the previous spaceship. There is space inside the ship for the robot. The antennas on the robot's head had to be folded to fit into the compartment, but it fitted in there. In the back of the rover you see another unique piece. Here is just part of the rover, but it was also used as a jetpack, and I will show it in the next set. If we fold the antennas on the robot's head and the antenna on the back of the rover, then we can load it back into the cargo space. The biggest set in 1985 was again very unique construction. It's a huge six-wheeled rover with very big wheels, which made it very capable in roof terrain. It had two hinges, so it was moving like a train, or like a snake, if you prefer. Very cool design was construction of the cockpits. They could be detached. There is a kind of flag here, like in the Arctic trailer, to support it. It's hard to say how was it supposed to move on its own, because with one axle only it tended to fall downwards. But if you detach the other cockpit as well, come on, you could join them together to make a very unique and probably amphibious rover with double ends, so the drivers had to agree who's driving. And then the middle section was stationary lab or something like this. What is cool you had 4 astronauts in this set: red, yellow, black and white. The white astronaut wears the jetpack that we've seen before. Here you have the light attached in front of the jetpack. In the back you have the 2 jet engines and 2 antennas. It's not clear where was the air tank for this astronaut, but let's hope there was some air container for him in this jetpack. An extra crew member was another robot. It's more traditional construction. And another interesting thing about this set was those weird structures on the roof of the lab. Each of them can be taken off. And give me a minute. If you attach it to the front of the rover and fix the wheels in this position, then you are getting a good sized spacecraft, probably capable of vertical takeoff. So you could turn a giant rover into a stationary lab with 2 flying craft for defense. It was very cool play factor for this set. I agree, it looked weird, but it was very pliable. And then for the very end we have an odd set for this year. By saying odd, I don't mean that it didn't fit in there. Of course it was compatible with all other sets, but all space sets had numbers starting with 67, 68 or 69. This is set 1968, and it looks like the aim of the designer was to use as many rare pieces as possible. So we have 6 of those flexible hoses in trans neon, in trans yellow. Additionally, you have the panels in the cargo compartment in trans yellow, which only appeared, I think, in 2 or 3 other sets, so they are rare parts as well. Then you have the new panels, and those engines at the bottom. They are not very unique parts, but you have 9 of them in a craft of this size. That's a bit of overkill, but let's get into it. The front section again can be detached, and you're getting a flying craft, small flying craft. It looks decent from the side, but when you look from the front, that looks very narrow. Some wing plates here would be very useful and would add extra to the shape of the craft. Cockpit is almost airtight. The only gap is here, but it's not a big problem. The cargo module is in the back of the spacecraft, and it contains another small rover. Additionally, there was a robot included in this set as well. Probably the robot could drive the rover, but again, the same problem as in all other sets except this one. There was no space for the robot in the spaceship, so hard to say how was he supposed to travel to accompany the astronaut. And in the spaceship there was enough space to make another cargo compartment, or make the existing cargo compartment slightly bigger to accommodate for the robot as well. If we put the rover back in, then we can close it. It's it's not a bad set, but I think if you look on the website Bricklink, the prices for this set are crazy because of the rarity and unavailability of a lot of parts for it. And the shape could be a bit less boxy. These gaps could be avoided. There was no need for this gap. For me, there is few bits missing on this set, but it's a nice addition just to make the series complete. So that was the sets from 1985. It was the first year where the robots appeared, and there was 6 of them. That's plenty for the first year. You had one small robot here. That's the second one, third, fourth inside this, 5th and 6th. And there was more to come in the following years, which I will show you in the next episodes. So follow us. Thank you.